Hey folks, I wanted to give you a heads up and let you know that this is going to be one of those episodes where, I'm not sure how to put it honestly. I guess without spoiling anything, I'd say if you have any real problems hearing sounds of pain or retching, what a way to introduce this. If that's the case, then maybe sit this one out. If you can handle that, then hey, enjoy. The fourth night. The dream came, after all. Konoe drifted in the mysterious space. Music echoed in the distance. It didn't take long for him to realize it was a dream. This time, it was dangerous. He struggled to wake up, but his body wouldn't listen to him. He couldn't even move the tip of his tail. It was like he'd become an object, not himself. Before long, the pulsing sound started. This was bad. Konoe desperately wanted to escape. Light blocked his view as if ridiculing him. The fourth light was a vivid red, a choking red like a bloodbath. A wet touch coiled itself around his ankle. It was a serpent, probably a red serpent. It was impossible to break loose. The snake slithered up his body just like the other three. The snake whispered in his ear. "Do you feel it?" It gradually tightened around his neck. When the red scales touched Konoe's skin, they burned like a branding iron. Konoe furrowed his eyebrows and trembled. The skin on his neck burned and festered. Even if he had tried to grab it and pull free, his palm sizzled and singed. "Do you feel it? Overflowing from my scales, my tongue, my eyes, my heartbeat, my existence. Do you feel it?" What was he supposed to feel? It was so hot that Konoe thought he'd prefer to be just strangled to death. It was hot. So hot. He heard the sound of flesh burning and the sound of fur sizzling off skin. "Answer. What am I to you? What do you feel?" Konoe scratched at the snake's body, but his fingertips only smoldered. The scales he scraped off scattered and fell to the ground. "Answer." Konoe needed to answer. An answer. The coiling serpent is stifling? As soon as Konoe thought of his answer, the red snake loosened. Konoe buckled down to the semi-translucent floor, convulsing. It was painful. It was probably the most painful of all these dreams so far. When he touched the festering wound on his throat, a sharp pain ran through him. Konoe's tongue stuck out as he wheezed. At his side, he heard a sound like rising steam. His view, full of pain and heat, was colored red. It was the snake. The snake flickered its tongue as if it were spitting out flames. Is it painful? Is it hot? That resentment, that anger, they are the source of everything. They become my sustenance. The snake glided on the floor to approach him. Even if he wanted to escape, Konoe's body felt like it was on fire, and he couldn't move. It would be over soon. If it was like the other dreams, it would be over soon. Konoe closed his eyes and waited for it to end. The heat of the serpent moved even closer, but The dream, the nightmare did not end. Well, I wonder if he's like been pulled into their world or something like that. The serpent coiled around Konoe's neck and raised its head to his cheek. He heard a voice clearly in his ear. All have gathered here. The red serpent, it tried to part Konoe's lips and enter his mouth. Accept me. Oh shit. Konoe twisted his body in surprise, not understanding what was happening. Because of the disgusted reaction of his body, he was going to try and catch that snake, but it entered his mouth without letting itself be caught. It slid from his mouth to his throat and kept going further down still. Tears of pain ran down his face. He couldn't breathe. Konoe felt like violently retching. The snake wriggled its body. Out of the corner of his eyes, he saw the red tail disappear into his mouth. The feeling of the foreign body inside his throat faded away. Konoe's ears lowered and his tail felt weak. As he laid down, exhausted, saliva dripped from the corner of his lips. The dream had not ended. The red snake entered his body and disappeared. He couldn't tell how much of it was a dream. Was it really a dream? Through the red space, he heard the rustling of fabric. Konoe's fur bristled. He knew those three colors all too well, and his eyes widened. Oh, don't tell me they're all gonna go in him. Serpents. Green, yellow, and blue. The three-colored snake slithered on the floor to him. He tried to get up, to flee, but his body didn't have any strength left. No way, Konoe muttered without blinking. The green snake touched his trembling lips. A strangely pliant mass parted them. The green serpent slid down his throat. Yep, that's what's going on here. Let's see. Yellow was pervy snake, blue was destructive snake, green was accept me. Konoe's voice wouldn't come. His throat was blocked. He felt dizzy, nauseous, and shed fearful tears. They all united and surged. Like the red snake, the green snake disappeared into his body. Then the yellow and blue ones. He closed his eyes, having no will to open them again. Maybe he didn't want to look. Accept me. His mouth was forced open, his tongue forced aside. Accept me. Filled with hatred and humiliation, Konoe shed tears. His nose burned, his trachea was pushed open. He heard the wet sound of something sliding against his esophagus. He thought that if it were pushed any further, it would be wrenched apart. His consciousness clouded. Konoe just wished that it would be over soon. This was no dream. So, is this like them using Konoe's body to somehow get into this world? 'Cause that's what I'm guessing is going on here. Admittedly, they did it kind of in a literal fashion. just get up all in there. Suddenly, Konoe came back to consciousness. He looked up at the dark ceiling. When Konoe jumped up, he immediately covered his mouth with both hands to stifle his cry, and he breathed roughly, his shoulders rising and falling. His skin was damp with sweat. Hatred welled up. The snakes, were they inside his body? Such a thing was just stupid. He was being ridiculous. One hand groped at his stomach as he thought about this. Konoe clearly remembered a long body passing into him through his throat, and the touch of scales. 4 had entered into his body. He felt like something wriggled in his belly, and a chill ran down his spine. The chill became more severe and turned into intense nausea. Konoe remembered the snakes disappearing, one by one, into his mouth. Dream or reality, it did not matter. He wanted to claw his stomach apart. Konoe covered his lips with a trembling hand and crawled out of bed. He couldn't make it outside in time and fell down, vomiting on the floor. Even as he emptied his stomach, the nausea did not stop. He was possessed with a hatred and a fear that rose in his throat. Konoe thought that something about his state was strange. Something was wrong. With his body? No, with something more vague. Like his feelings, his consciousness, his emotions. It hurt. It felt so painful. Konoe started vomiting stomach acid and began to shed pitiful tears. He continued to vomit until his cheek met the floor and he passed out. Smelling earth, Konoe lightly opened his eyes. The floor was right under him. He seemed to have lost consciousness and had fallen on his face. When he raised his head, he felt it ache, and he grimaced. His mind felt dim and heavy, his thoughts dull as mud. When he tried to rise, Konoe noticed his body was oddly stiff. You know, I figured after that last episode, with that really sweet interlude with Konoe and Tokuno, that something probably pretty fucked up was gonna happen afterwards, because they want to give you something really sweet, and then they'll hit you over the head with something really awful. Because if it's just all awful, then you just go numb to it. So they cut in good things to make the bad things hurt more. So yeah, fucking snake mouth time, I guess. Okay, that's not sexual sounding at all, is it? Just fucking 4 snakes went into his mouth, one after another. He felt a terrible cramp in his stomach. A different scent rose along with the scent of the soil, and Konoe finally began to remember the night before. Yesterday, he had a dream. A bitter thought spread through his mind, and Konoe bit his lip. Konoe couldn't even tell if he was dreaming. He had vomited until he lost consciousness. How deplorable. Oh, poor baby. Don't hate yourself over that. Kind of been a really fucked up situation. Konoe slowly got up. He swayed unsurely on his feet. Whenever he moved, his head began to ache again, and Konoe put a hand against the wall, gritting his teeth and slowing his breathing. The remnants of what he'd vomited up were still on the floor. He cleaned it up with a broom made of branches, then covered it with sand. Good job. Scooping water from the barrel, Konoe rinsed his mouth and washed his face and hands. The outside world was already tainted with the color of the moonset. How long had he slept? Konoe sat on his bed and felt like he was sinking through the floor. Konoe laid down and solemnly looked at the dark room. He didn't want to think about anything. Konoe was certain his thoughts would only be of terrible things. Instead, he decided to groom and stretched his arm out slowly to do so. It was a habit. If he did it fervently enough, Konoe could stifle his feelings. He stopped, his tongue still sticking out. Something felt wrong when he regarded his arm. He was at a loss for words. What? There was something on his arm. It danced on his skin and looked like a mark. It stood out clearly, and even rubbing it with his other hand didn't make it fade. Since when did he have this? He certainly didn't have it yesterday. It must have happened while he was unconscious. Probably because of all the fucking weirdo snake things in you. The pattern drifted all the way to his wrist, on both his left and right hands, and on his feet, too. His heart beat painfully. It seemed to pierce through his body, trying to escape. Konoe broke out in a cold sweat. His vision became hazy and his ears rang. When Konoe fell to the floor with a jerk, he began to rub sand against his arms and legs. Oh, don't do that. Even though his skin began to turn red, he kept rubbing. Still, the black marks remained. Shit! Konoe flung sand at the floor with all his might, becoming more and more confused and irritated. He felt like tearing up all of his furniture. He harshly clawed at the floor. Look, I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation for all of this. I mean, you probably just, I don't know, drank too much of that water and went out. Yeah, you're fucked. I'm sorry. Sorry, Konoe. Hey, maybe you'll be able to do magic now or something. Unable to keep still, Konoe began to pace around his home, lost. He didn't understand why this happened at all, and in this state, he couldn't go outside. In the small village of Karou, the cats didn't seem to interact very much, but the ties between them were unexpectedly strong. This was something Konoe couldn't fit in with. Furthermore, the cats of Karou weren't exactly tolerant. Even if you were brethren, you would be exiled if deemed a threat. So what, having some ink on your hands and legs is gonna be a problem for them? Jeez. Fucking, well, they just outlaw dancing or something while they're at it, I guess. Then there was the mental state caused by their poverty. If discovered, he didn't know what would happen. Close relationships with other village cats didn't matter. Even those without any close friendship could still live alone, without accommodations. However, the home in which Konoe lived had memories of his mother, memories of his childhood. Therefore, this was one place he always wanted to remember. Leaving the village would be the same as throwing away the memories of his mother. Oh, I don't know about that, Konoe. I think you'll always have your mother in your heart. It's not about the house. I know it's hard, because there's so much attached to it, but I think you'll be happier if you go out and see the world, to be honest. I don't know, let's go. It was the only thing that brought him warmth. He didn't want to lose it. Konoe suddenly stopped pacing and looked back at the door. A cat had arrived. Visitors were usually rare. Why now, of all times? Konoe heard knocking at the door. Konoe, you there? I don't know, maybe it's Tokuno, but I doubt it since he just left yesterday. This voice, oh, Sin. Sounded like Sin, the hot-headed cat with whom he'd settled a territorial dispute the other day. It's me, Sin. You in there? Konoe considered pretending to be out, but it was too late to hide the signs of his presence. His presence had already been given away. Sin knew he was inside. Konoe approached the door. I'm busy, so go away. His voice was hoarse. He felt thirsty and his heart kept pounding in his ears. Please leave, he prayed. But he already felt that Sin had a hand on the door. The hair on his body stood up. It's, something important. Don't come in. What is it? Are you sick? Maybe? Konoe made a fist, his palm sweating. He pushed his head against the wall and closed his eyes tightly, then opened them and stared at his dark room. Was this how cornered prey felt when fleeing? His breathing sounded rough. Konoe shook his tail to vent his frustrated feelings. When its tip came into view, he almost cried out. He covered his mouth with his hands at once. His tail was a white one, tinged with brown at the tip. Oh. But as it was shaking in front of him now, it was pure black. Oh, that's interesting. Konoe couldn't believe his eyes. He caught his tail and drew it towards himself. He tried to rub it, but the color still remained. Tats and a dye job, huh? Okay. It was an ominous black, dark as night. He heard Sin sigh through the door. I get it, but I do have something important to say, so I'll just say it here. Konoe didn't want to make his frustration known. He tried to steady his breathing. It's a message from the Elder. You get it now, right? Sin's voice sank darkly. Oh shit, so Konoe's the next sacrifice. Konoe's view shook greatly. Did that mean he had been chosen as the sacrifice? His whole body stiffened and his hands felt numb. His vision narrowed and darkened. A sacrifice, eaten alive, his flesh torn apart while he still lived. Rent by the fangs of starving cats, consumed down to the bone. Obey the rules. It's your duty to our people. That's what I was told to tell you. That's all. Sin fled. For Konoe, it was a death warrant. He had begun to shake desperately. He was chosen as the sacrifice. At such a time, especially at such a time, after his body was purified, it would be eaten. Where would they start? Would they start with his fingers? Would they start with his stomach? Or would they start with his neck? Konoe thought about that and laughed. Obey the rules? It was his duty to their people? It was ludicrous. He felt like he was going mad. Konoe cast his eyes to his arm with its hateful markings. Because he'd rubbed sand against it, the skin was now red hot. His tail shook at the edge of his view. What he saw wasn't a mistake. Now, he understood how the cats who developed the sickness must have felt. Nothing mattered. Despair was steadily drawing near. Well, shit. This doesn't look good for our protagonist kitty.